They handed me a mop 3 days after my hip surgery and told me the kitchen floor wasn't going to clean itself. That was the moment I realized my own children saw me as nothing but free labor. But they had no idea about the phone call I was about to make, the one that would take away everything they thought was theirs. Before I tell you what happened, if you believe every parent deserves respect in their golden years, hit that like button right now. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories about standing up after a lifetime of being pushed down, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. My name is Kathy. I'm 69 years old, and for the last 4 years I have lived in the very house I paid for, cooking, cleaning, and caring for grandchildren who were never mine to raise, while my own children treated me like hired help they didn't have to pay. This is my story told exactly the way it happened in my own words. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand how a mother ends up a stranger in her own home. My husband passed away 6 years ago. Congestive heart failure took him in his sleep, and I woke up one October morning to a silence I had never known in 41 years of marriage. We built that house together brick by brick, mortgage payment by mortgage payment. I taught elementary school for 32 years. He worked at the plant. We weren't rich, but we owned that home outright by the time he died. And it was paid for with sweat, patience, and every ounce of love we had. I have 2 children. My son, whom I'll call James, and my daughter, whom I'll call Denise. When their father died, they were both kind at first. James suggested I move in with him and his wife, Carol, just until you get back on your feet. I was drowning in grief, and the idea of an empty house terrified me, so I agreed. I sold my house, the house your father and I built, and I gave James and Carol every penny from that sale to help them buy a bigger home, one with a mother-in-law suite they promised would be mine forever. I want you to sit with that for a second. I gave away my own home, my own security, because I trusted my son with everything I had left. $231,000. That's what the house sold for. Every dollar went into the down payment of their new 5-bedroom colonial on the other side of town. The first few months were fine. I had my own little suite, a bedroom, a small sitting area, my own bathroom. I felt useful. I picked my grandchildren up from school. I made dinner some nights because I enjoyed it. But slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice it happening, helping out became expected. And expected became demanded. By the end of the first year, I was making dinner every single night. Not because I offered, because if I didn't, Carol would sigh loudly in the kitchen and say things like, "I guess we're ordering takeout again," in a tone that made it clear whose fault that would be. I was doing all the laundry. Not just mine, there's James's work shirts, Carol's yoga clothes, 3 children's worth of soccer uniforms and school clothes. I didn't complain, not at first. I told myself this was what family did. This was what my own mother had done for me. But there's a difference between helping your family and being used by it. And I was too deep in grief and gratitude to see which one I had become. Then came the day that changed how I saw everything. I fell in my son's backyard trying to bring in the trash bins during an ice storm, because Carol had asked me to do it while she and James were at a work dinner. I broke my hip. 72 years old, no wait, I was 65 then, and I broke my hip taking out the garbage for people who wouldn't lift a finger for me. I had hip replacement surgery. I was in the hospital for 4 days. James visited once. Denise didn't visit at all. She called it just too much right now because she was dealing with her own stuff. Carol came only to drop off a bag of my clothes, and she left within 10 minutes because she had somewhere to be. 3 days after I came home from that surgery, 3 days, I was handed a mop. I was still using a walker. My incision hadn't even fully closed. Carol stood in the kitchen doorway and told me the floor wasn't going to clean itself, and when I said I couldn't possibly do that yet, she rolled her eyes and said, "Must be nice to just relax while the rest of us work." I want you to imagine that. The woman who raised her husband, who gave them $250,000, who cooked their meals and washed their children's clothes for years, being told it must be nice to relax while recovering from major surgery. That night, lying in that small guest suite that was supposed to be mine forever, I cried in a way I hadn't cried since my husband's funeral. Not from sadness this time, from clarity. Something inside me, something that had been asleep for years, finally woke up. I started paying attention after that. Really paying attention. I noticed that my name was never on anything in that house. Not the deed, not a lease, nothing. I noticed that Carol had started referring to my suite as the guest room to her friends, as if I were a visitor who had simply overstayed. I noticed that my grandchildren, who used to run to hug me, had started treating me the way their parents did, like furniture that occasionally spoke. The final straw came 4 months after my hip surgery, when I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. I had gone downstairs late at night for water, and James and Carol were in the kitchen talking in hushed voices. Carol said, "Once your mother's Social Security kicks in fully next year, maybe she can finally start paying rent here. She's basically living for free." James, my own son, laughed and said she'll do it. She doesn't have anywhere else to go. What's she gonna do, leave? Doesn't have anywhere else to go. What's she gonna do, leave? I stood in that dark hallway with my glass of water shaking in my hand, and something in me went very, very still and very, very cold. They had planned this. Not just taken advantage of me by accident, they had counted on my dependence. They saw my grief, my generosity, my broken hip, and they had calculated exactly how far they could push a woman with nowhere else to go. Except they were wrong about one thing. I did have somewhere else to go. I had something they didn't know about. Here's what my children didn't know. Before my husband passed away, we had a life insurance policy and a modest retirement fund that I never touched, never mentioned, and never let anyone know the full amount of. My husband, God rest him, was a private man, and he always told me, "Kathy, never let anyone know everything you have. Not even the children." At the time I thought that was overly cautious. Standing in that hallway that night, I understood exactly what he meant. That fund, combined with the life insurance payout I'd invested quietly with an old friend from my school days who had become a financial advisor, had grown to just over $400,000. I had never touched it because I didn't need to. I was living in my suite, contributing my own Social Security to groceries, believing I was part of a family that took care of each other. The next morning I made a phone call. Not to my children. To a lawyer named Mr. Whitfield, an old family friend who had handled my husband's estate. I told him everything. The money I'd given James, the labor I'd been providing, the conversation I'd overheard. I asked him one simple question. Did I have any legal claim to that house, given that my money had funded a quarter of its down payment? He told me something I hadn't considered. Because I had given that money as a personal loan disguised as a gift, with texts and emails where James had said things like, "We'll pay you back eventually, Mom, I promise," I actually had grounds to pursue repayment. It wouldn't give me the house, but it could force them to either repay me in full or face a formal claim against their assets. But that's not the call that changed everything. That came 2 days later. I called a real estate agent named Linda, an old friend from my teaching days whose daughter had been in my 3rd grade class 30 years earlier. I told her I wanted to buy a small home. Nothing fancy, just something with 2 bedrooms and a garden, somewhere close enough to my old neighborhood that I could still see my former students' families at the grocery store. I told her I had cash. I told her I wanted to move fast. Within 11 days, I owned a small brick house with a covered porch and a lemon tree in the backyard. Paid in full in cash. No mortgage, no permission needed from anyone, no one to answer to. I didn't tell James or Carol a single thing while this was happening. I kept cooking dinner. I kept doing the laundry. I smiled at Carol when she made her little comments. I let them believe nothing had changed, because I needed those 11 days to belong entirely to me. On the 12th day, I packed my belongings while they were at work and school. It took me most of the day. I am 69, not 29, but by 4 in the afternoon, everything I owned was in the moving truck I'd hired, and my new home smelled like fresh paint and lemon blossoms. I left one letter on the kitchen counter. Not cruel, not screaming, just honest. I wrote that I had heard their conversation that night. I wrote that I loved my grandchildren more than anything and would always be there for them, but that I would no longer be their unpaid housekeeper, cook, and nanny while being treated like a burden. I wrote that the $231,000 I had given them had never been forgotten, and that Mr. Whitfield would be in touch regarding repayment terms. And I wrote that I hoped someday they would understand that respect is not something you can inherit. It has to be earned every single day from the people who love you. Then I drove to my new house, sat on my own porch, in a rocking chair I bought that very week, and I watched the sun go down over my own lemon tree for the first time in 4 years. The phone calls started that night. Furious at first. James called 11 times. Carol sent a text so venomous I actually saved it, thinking someday I might need to show it to that lawyer. Denise, who hadn't visited me once during my hip recovery, suddenly called crying, asking how I could do this to the family. I let it all go to voicemail. For the first time in years, my silence was a choice, not a symptom of exhaustion. 3 weeks passed before James finally showed up at my new house, not angry this time but quiet, almost unrecognizable. He sat on my porch steps and admitted that hearing that conversation replayed to him in a letter had made him feel sick to his stomach in a way he couldn't ignore. He told me Carol was furious about the repayment demand, but that he had told her the truth. I deserved every cent and more. I won't pretend it was an instant, movie-perfect reconciliation. It wasn't. Trust doesn't rebuild in a single conversation on a porch. But it was a start. An honest one built on truth instead of obligation. Over the following months, something shifted. James began visiting on his own, without Carol, bringing the grandchildren for Sunday lunches at my little house. Not because I demanded service from them, but because we wanted to be together the way family should. Denise, to my surprise, was the one who struggled hardest with guilt, and she began calling every week, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to apologize again for things I had already forgiven. James did repay the loan in installments, exactly as Mr. Whitfield structured it. It took him almost 2 years to pay it in full, and every single payment felt less like money and more like an apology in the form of respect. As for Carol, our relationship remains distant, and I've made peace with that. Not every relationship can be repaired, and I've learned at 69 years old that peace sometimes means accepting what won't change rather than forcing what can't. Today I wake up every morning in my own home. I make coffee in my own kitchen on my own schedule for no one but myself. My grandchildren visit because they want to, and when they leave I don't collapse into a chair from exhaustion. I simply enjoy the quiet. I volunteer twice a week at the elementary school down the road, reading to third graders who remind me of the children I used to teach, and for the first time since my husband passed I feel like Kathy again, not somebody's free housekeeper, not somebody's forgotten obligation, just Kathy. I share this story not for sympathy, and not even really for revenge, though I won't pretend that letter didn't feel like the most powerful thing I've written in my life. I share it because I know there are other women out there, mothers, grandmothers, women who gave everything to their families, who are being quietly taken for granted right now, today in kitchens just like the one I used to mop 3 days after surgery. If this is you, please hear me when I say this. Your love for your children does not obligate you to disappear. Helping family is beautiful. Being used by family is not love. It's exploitation wearing love's clothing, and you are allowed to tell the difference. You are allowed to have money they don't know about. You are allowed to have plans they aren't part of. You are allowed to walk away from disrespect, even from the people who share your blood, and build something quietly, patiently, entirely your own. I am 69 years old, and I bought my freedom back with 1 phone call to a lawyer and 1 phone call to a realtor. It is never too late to remember who you are. If my story meant something to you today, please give this video a like and subscribe for more real stories about standing up, starting over, and reclaiming your worth at any age. And if you've ever been treated like a servant in your own family, tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one, and I promise you, you are not alone.